Epics data types. So let's examine the data types in Epics a little bit closer. The Epics language is a strongly typed, so every variable in Epics will be declared with a specific data type. All Epics variables are initialized to null initially, and it's always recommended for a developer to make sure that the proper values are assigned to the variable. Otherwise, such variables when used will throw null pointer exceptions or any unhandled exception. Epics supports the following data types. Number one, primitive, and that includes integer, double, long, date, datetime, string, ID, and Boolean. Number two, collections, and that includes lists, sets, and maps, which will be covered in a future segment. And then Salesforce objects, annotated as S object. Number four, enums. And number five, classes, objects, and interfaces, which each one of those will be discussed in a different segment in the future. In this section, however, we will look at all the primitive data types, S objects or Salesforce objects, and enums. We'll be looking at collections, classes, objects, and interfaces in future subjects. So let's look at primitive data types. The first one is integer. An integer is a 32-bit number that does not include any decimal points. The value range for this starts with minus 2.1 trillion and some, at a maximum value of up to 2.1 trillion and some. And as you can see in the example, if you want to declare a variable which will store the quantity of barrels which need to be shipped to the buyer in our plant, then we will have the declaration as integer, and then the name, which is barrel numbers, and then equal to 1000. The system debug function prints the value of variables so that we can use this to debug or to get to know what the value of the variable hold currently. So we can paste the above code to our developer console and click execute. Once the logs are generated, then it will show the value of variable barrel numbers as 1000. Now we move to the Boolean data type. This variable can either be true, false, or null. Many times this type of variable can be used as a flag in programming to identify if the particular condition is set or not set. So looking at the example, if the Boolean shipment dispatch is set to true, then it can be declared as Boolean shipment dispatched, and then we would have shipment dispatch equal to true. And then we'll add the system debug, and between brackets, value of shipment plus shipment dispatch, so we can see that value. Another data type is date. This variable type indicates a date. This can only store the date and not the time. For saving the date along with time, we would need to store it in a variable of date time. And as you can see in the example, consider the following example to understand how the date variable works. Next, we see the data type long. This is a 64-bit number without a decimal point. This is used when we need a range of values wider than those provided by an integer. And the example displays that. And then we have object. We can refer this as any data type which is supposed or supported in EPEX. For example, class variable can be object of the class, and then the Salesforce object, S object, which is a generic type, is also an object, and similarly specific object type like account is also an object. Consider the following example to understand how the object variable works under object. Now notice that you can create an object of predefined class as well, as given below in the final example, which is the class object which will be used as a class variable. Now let's move to the next data type, which is string. String is any set of characters with single quotes. It does not have any limit for the number of characters. Here the heap size will be used to determine the number of characters. This puts a curb on the monopoly of resources by EPEX program and also ensures that it does not get too large. And we can see the example. Next is time. This variable is used to store the particular time. The variable should always be declared with a system static method. The next data type is a blob. The blob is a collection of binary data which is stored as an object. This will be used when we want to store attachments in Salesforce into a variable. This data type converts the attachments into a single object. If the blob is to be converted into a string, then we can make use of the toString and the value of methods for the same. Next is the S object, or the Salesforce object. This is a special data type in Salesforce. It is similar to a table in SQL and contains fields which are similar to columns in SQL. There are two types of Salesforce objects, standard and custom. For example, account is a standard object, and any other user-defined objects like customer object that we created is a custom object. And the example clarifies that. Enum is an abstract data type that stores one value of a finite set of specified identifiers. So we can use the keyword enum to define an enum, and it can be used as any other data type in Salesforce, as shown in the example, where we declare the possible